So I'm Vera. I'm a project researcher from Laura, University of Applied Sciences. And on behalf of the entire Baltic Second-Hand project team, I would like to warmly welcome you all to our first webinar, How can the textile industry shift towards circularity? Now, here's a quick look at our agenda for today. So I'm going to be giving you a very quick overview of the Baltic Second-Hand project, and also inform you on how your organisation can get involved. After that, my colleague Erika Heinonen will be presenting you the organisation research insights, focusing on the opportunities for reducing textile waste and also increasing textile reuse. After this, I'm going to be presenting the consumer research insights to you all. So I'm going to be focusing on consumer behaviour trends and also future considerations with a special focus on second-hand. Now, we do have 5 minutes reserved for the end for a quick Q&A session. However, the Baltic Second-Hand team will be staying behind for an extra 15 minutes after this webinar. So if you do want to ask any more questions or have a bit more of an in-depth discussion, please feel free to stay behind also. Now, because we are a little bit limited on time, we do ask that you do save all of your questions until the Q&A, so until after the presentations. You can, of course, always write your question into the chat. We'll pick that up and we'll go through that at the end, or just feel free to ask your question once we start opening up the mics during the Q&A. But OK, let's get started. So, Baltic Second-Hand project towards circularity through co-creation. So the Baltic Second-Hand project, it's funded by an Interreg Central Baltic Programme 2021 to 2027, and it's also co-funded by the European Union. We do have 5 organisations working together on this project. We have 2 from Finland, 1 from Latvia, 1 from Estonia, and also 1 from Sweden. Their names are written just here on the slide. Now, co-creation is really at the very centre of the Baltic Second-Hand project. So through co-creation, we are aiming to develop existing or new circular business models and services, identify new business opportunities, especially across borders in Finland, Sweden, Latvia and Estonia, and also create some consumer incentives which would encourage the use of circular business models and services. This is a very quick visual representation of our project time schedule. As you can see, we are still in the market research and discovery phase of the project, but we'll be moving on to our project events very, very soon. The Baltic Second-Hand project, we are offering 2 different types of events, a one-off design jam event. And for this, we'll be inviting 5 organisations to participate. And here, the organisations will receive some help in solving their design challenges. We also have several workshops which we are offering. And for these workshops, these are welcome to all those organisations who are interested and are within the target organisations of our project. So very quickly, just about the workshops, your organisation has the opportunity to participate in 1 or even several of the workshops, depending on your time and availability. The total number of hours that you would have to commit if you want to participate for the entire Baltic Second-Hand project is only 9 hours. The first workshops that we would be focusing on are the ideation workshops. So these ideation workshops, usually, as you can see, they are topic-based workshops. So these are some of the topics we have currently selected for these workshops, and they have come from the research and desk research and field research findings which we have. However, what is important to us is that we, of course, design these workshops based on your real needs and your real interests. So my colleague has just attached a link, a Padlet link in the chat. If you could all please go and click on that link and just vote for those topics and provide feedback on those topics which best reflect your needs and your interests. So the Baltic Second-Hand project, we are centred on a co-creative approach, and we are hoping to help find sustainable solutions in the Baltic textile industry. So by joining our project, you of course can enhance your own journey towards circularity. But now, without further ado, let's get into the research. So the organisation research, that's going to be presented by my colleague Erika Heinonen. She's a project researcher from Turku University of Applied Sciences. So Erika, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Vera. And as said, my name is Erika Heinonen, and I come from the University of Applied Science, Turku University of Applied Sciences in Finland. And my colleagues and I conducted a desk research on this project during summer and fall this year. The desk research included getting to know the current state of the second-hand market in the Central Baltic region, the best business models for decreasing textile waste and increasing reuse, as well as consumer nudging activities. The field research was conducted in 3 stages: organization interviews, consumer interviews, and consumer survey. We interviewed organizations from all around the Central Baltic region, 20 in total. And now I will focus on the desk research and company interview results, and Vera will continue on the consumer research after me. So next, I will go through some points of reflection based on our research on what organizations should consider when developing a successful circular business. The companies emphasized in our interviews the need for consumer engagement, donating, purchasing, being willing to pay more for items produced through circular operations, and trying new circular services for the first time. Hence, the market needs active consumers. This can be facilitated through better marketing strategies and sharpening the brand image, but also through nudging. In our research, we focused on nudging in the second-hand market. Not a lot of research is done in this area, especially from the perspective of selling, but there are some examples that can be used in nudging the consumers towards reusing. First, through visual and physical nudges, we can give a visual presentation, a haptic product experience, or a physical experience, for example, through the smell of fresh laundry or other pleasant fragrance. Hence giving the consumers positive memories and making them want to come back to the store. Second, through the availability nudge, we can provide consumers with knowledge and positive examples of circular services and products. For example, giving a concrete number of how much less carbon emissions or water is used when consuming second-hand products instead of new, or having a tag to status the previous owners of the product. And thirdly, through political nudges, we can support circular consumption alternatives. As price is often the most important factor in consumers' purchase behavior, we can give economic support through political decision-making, such as the repair bonus of France, where they are giving a voucher for citizens to repair their clothes up to 25 euros, or the textile deposit of Lahti, Finland, which encouraged people to bring their discarded textiles to collection points in exchange for a voucher to be used in a coffee shop or for sports. So these are only few examples of how consumption of reuse can be supported. However, each circular operator needs a personalized nudge that appeals to their target group. There's a need to rethink the supply chain when moving from linear towards circular products and services. We need to think about how to design comprehensive supply chain which can contribute towards the extension of the product's life cycle. There's a need to design deeply interconnected supply chains. Through rethinking the processes, new partnerships can emerge. Essentially, the more direct partnership or ownership the brand or an organization has of the supply chain actors, the easier and more effective changes can be made. Working supply chains need commitment in every stage of the way, accurate monitoring and reporting transparency and responsibility throughout. It was highlighted by some interviewed organizations that whilst legislation and development is being pushed on brands and retailers, much of this also needs to be done at the very beginning of the supply chain. As one brand rarely can hold a monopoly over or influence on one manufacturer, there needs to be cooperation and commitment across. Moreover, to secure a working supply chain, sensible logistics, not creating more emissions, for instance, need to be identified. This requires looking at the local versus global markets, designing for longevity, and looking at what resources are needed to maintain this, as well as finding solutions that are scalable and remain profitable while the prices remain competitive. Implementing circular economy business model can act as a risk mitigation strategy. Circular economy operations are helping to meet sustainability needs and goals and remain within or ahead of legislation, securing the future of the organization. For companies that are not yet as involved in circular economy activities, smaller operations and experimenting are a good way to start. Smaller operations may, however, be more costly in the short run, which is why piloting projects such as this one need to be supported and establish practical change. Therefore, there's a need for strategy and vision for scalability. In other words, what will happen after piloting? However, scaling up or increasing circular economy operations past requirements is not yet protected by legislation or regulation. So there needs to be enforcement for both consumers and organizations to scale up and fully commit in this direction. Next, I will go through some activities we found enabling the organizations to move towards circularity. Legislation and regulation will speed up the development of circular economy in the textile industry. Supply chains operating under similar legal and regulative frameworks support cooperation. This creates positive motivation for companies to start or continue developing circular services. Cooperation on these issues along the entire supply chain is necessary. The legislation is creating safer and less risky conditions to try new services and models. Organizations are now no longer being the first, but it's also important not to be the last either. However, the lack of clarity on how legislation and regulations will impact organizations now and in the future affects the preparing for them and planning of where to invest. There's a need for clear and comprehensive guidelines under which to operate. When finding partners for circular business, there's a need to identify the right ones for each organization and each need. Some may need expertise to help transitions, others need to secure scalability, and others to alleviate resource demand. Partnerships create opportunities. Alternative markets can emerge, which can then be entered through partnerships, in this case, in the Nordics and Baltics, or closer to home. Taking the most out of cooperation means sharing knowledge, practices, and experience. What works and how, what doesn't and why. The consumer demand of second-hand textiles is already high, but makes up only 9% in the UK and 3.5% globally of all textiles on the market. Moreover, the replacement rate of second-hand clothes based on a study on the Vinted platform is around 30%. There is therefore even more potential for the second-hand market to develop. Second-hand needs to replace the buying of new items, and only then can it become a more sustainable choice for the consumers. There is a lot of potential in the consumer-to-consumer second-hand market. The resale value of the products is therefore important. New technologies can especially help in this market. Second-hand market fulfills people's need and will for bargain hunting, like finding a second-hand alternative to an expensive new item. Because of inflation and increasing prices, consumers are now more than ever prone to looking for alternatives from the second-hand market. These points of demand should be harnessed better by the organizations. And lastly, circular economy is a great marketing tool. Most companies are already committed to sustainable development goals, and for example, the aim of carbon neutrality. Circular economy acts as a tool in reaching these goals. Not only the ones concerning the climate and the environment, but also the ones concerning economy and society. But being circular requires staying ahead, as opposed to merely meeting the obligations. Many fear being accused of greenwashing, hence there's a need for ultimate transparency in creating new circular business. I would now like you to think, how do you think that Baltic Second-Hand project can support the transformation towards circularity in your business? Next, I will hand it to Vera, who will tell you more about the consumer research done in this project.
Thank you, Erika. Thank you so much for that great insights. Okay, so I'm back. I'm going to be sharing with you all the consumer research insights of our project. So the consumer research, which I'm going to be, the insights, sorry, which I'm going to be sharing with you, they are based on the desk research, which was produced by our partners in Turku. They did a desk research report based on consumer behavior trends and also on our own field research. So we conducted a 30-question online representative consumer survey in all 4 countries, so Estonia, Latvia, Finland, and Sweden. We were aiming for 300 in Estonia, 300 in Latvia, 700 in Finland, and 700 in Sweden. Our research company, who we hired for this purpose, Kuulas Oy, were very generous. They gave us a few extra participants, so that was great. Now, this consumer survey, it was split into 3 different sections. I'm not going to overload you all with an overwhelming amount of data. So for today, I'm just going to be focusing on the 3rd section of this consumer survey. And that was focusing on the consumption and selling behavior of consumers, with a special focus on the second-hand market. So let's have a look at some of the motivators which we identified. So this is now focusing on those consumers who are already using and buying second-hand textiles. Now, interestingly, around 50% of all of those who were surveyed currently do buy second-hand textiles, and that was in all 4 country locations. There are some differences. As you can see, in Estonia, it's around 61%, Finland 56%, Latvia 55%, and Sweden 45%. But as a general view, around about 50% of the market is currently involved in buying second-hand textiles. Now, for organizations, I think this brings 2 great opportunities. One is that there clearly is a very high demand for second-hand textiles. Now, that also means there is great room for development and innovation for those consumers who are already using. So making this second-hand textile experience, purchasing it, more enjoyable, easier, trying to increase even the engagement of those who are already using the second-hand textile market to buy clothing. On the other hand, there is still the other 50% who are yet to do so. So again, brilliant opportunities to expand this market even further. So getting those consumers who are not currently buying involved in the second-hand market. Thinking of maybe innovative new models and services which could be used to entice those different consumer segments, which might be at this moment in time still a little bit reluctant in trying second-hand clothing. Now, on the other hand, there will, of course, also be those consumer segments who are extremely reluctant to buying second-hand textiles for one reason or another. So in the short term, also maybe thinking of other innovative services which could be provided, which would still support circularity. So in this sense, we're talking about repair, we're talking about made to order, and we're talking about, for example, tailoring, etc., etc. But there are plenty of other circular models which can then be used to try to get these consumers also involved in the circular market. So this, in regarding to the motivators for why consumers currently do choose to buy second-hand clothing, this was a multiple choice question. So the consumers could pick whatever the motivations for them were. However, I'm going to be showing you the top 3, which were ranked in each country location. So as you can see, price is a heavy favorite. For many people, price is the ultimate motivator for actually buying second-hand clothing. It is still definitely associated with a more cheaper, inexpensive option to buying new clothing. Interestingly, in Finland and Sweden, there is also this motivation of treasure hunting. So clearly there is some form of excitement of this activity of being able to find these hidden gems or treasures amongst a lot of other items. And this is potentially a very motivating form of shopping for those who have a very unlimited amount of time when it comes to actually shopping for clothing. Now, of course, this is not for everyone. However, what I wanted to point out here is that clearly the current second-hand or the traditional second-hand store model is very fitting for these kind of consumer segments who actually enjoy treasure hunting. But this idea that there are so many different choices of how we can present second-hand, and there is something for everyone. We do not have to have this one fit for all, but we can really have a look at what are the consumers who we want to target and how best then to actually provide this second-hand market to those consumers. Now in Estonia and Latvia, interestingly, there was also this idea of being able to buy a special item for a special occasion. So this can be interpreted in 2 ways. So either that potentially is some form of, or potentially that is this, that consumers would actually like to go buy a piece of clothing which they might only use once or twice for a special occasion, and they would much rather than buy it at second hand because it's much more inexpensive. Or then there is this other option that it is for special occasions, for example, fancy dress, when you need to have some form of clothing for a very special form of an event, whether this is for a costume, etc. But in either of those cases, what's very interesting is that, again, it shows the way of how, if we do have consumers where there is this form of demand, thinking how we can then supply for that demand. When we're looking at how we are going to organize, for example, our second-hand, maybe making sure that those kind of sections of items are specifically labeled or set out separately so that it will make this experience more convenient for those who are buying. Even thinking of course, also making a niche, specializing in these kind of second-hand clothing is also an option. Now, although price was very heavily associated with second-hand and it is a main motivator, very interestingly, it is not linked with this idea of poverty, so with this idea of being somehow economically disadvantaged. So that clearly is a negative correlation between household income and second-hand consumption. So those who consume, sorry, I apologize. So as the household income increases, the consumption of second-hand tends to decrease. So that is that negative correlation between those two. However, second-hand is not associated with this idea that out of economic need, people are buying second-hand, but it is more of an economically smart choice. So it's making your money go further. It's no longer seen as people who are unable to buy new clothes. They are forced to buy second-hand. But in these times of economic instability, inflation, actually being economically smart is seen as a quite positive characteristic, especially in the European countries. So it is interesting that second-hand, although it is associated with lower price, it's definitely been able to get rid of this negative poverty label that it may have had some years back. So in regards to some of the emotions that consumers who are buying second-hand textiles and wearing second-hand textiles, this was also a multiple choice question, so they could of course choose however many emotions they wanted or they identified with. In Finland, that definitely is the top 3 ranked, definitely are very, very positive. This feeling of being happy, being proud, being excited. This may suggest that in Finland, this idea of buying second-hand is still at this peak of a trend, which would mean that those people who tend to maybe consume a lot feel much less guilt. They're able to get rid of those economic and ecological feelings of guilt that they might have when they normally consume. And therefore, this being able to buy second-hand is this very proud, very happy, very exciting. You feel you're doing your part. And it's maybe more we could basically say it's maybe more peaking at a trend at the moment. In Sweden, again, very happy emotions were identified, and also this feeling of indifference was definitely higher in compared to Finland. That would hopefully suggest that it's going towards more of a norm. So it's starting to be seen as more of a normal way of shopping. It's not really anything out of the blue, extraordinary. We need to shout about it. It's more of a very normal way of shopping for clothing. And again, this was reflected quite similarly in Estonia, where this feeling of excitement and indifference were ranked at the same level. And also in Latvia, where indifference really was the highest ranked emotion that people felt. So for me, a positive take on that is that hopefully in Estonia and Latvia, this idea of buying secondhand for those who are buying secondhand is very normal. It's a viable way of them actually purchasing clothing. They don't feel they do not feel that it's an extraordinary or out of the norm kind of act. So for me, it was a very positive thing to see. Now, here are some of the consumer barriers. Let's have a look. So in regards to consumer barriers, I'm first going to be looking at those people who are currently, well, this is mainly going to be focusing on those who are currently not actually buying secondhand clothing. Now, interestingly, those who do not buy secondhand clothing, the barriers for avoiding doing so were a little bit different. So for those who currently do not buy secondhand clothing, but would consider buying secondhand clothing in the future, currently avoid doing so due to inconvenience and suitability. So not maybe being able to find the right item, not being able to find the right sizes. They find it very inconvenient and it just doesn't suit them. Now, those who would not consider buying secondhand in the future, so currently do not buy and would not consider doing so, they mainly avoid doing so due to hygiene and not wanting to wear used items. So there are 2 very different kinds of barriers that were identified. On the one hand, these barriers for those who would consider are to do with it being functional, it being practical. So I feel that hurdle is a little bit easier to overcome. We can try to design the shopping experience of buying secondhand textiles. We can try to make it much more convenient, trying to maybe divide clothes into the certain size categories that there are, so people will be able to find their sizes easier, maybe depending on the style, the purpose of the clothing, depending on season. So there definitely are ways that we can make this much more convenient, and also looking at some of the best practices which are in the linear, very normal mainstream shopping stores, having a look at what can we take from those and also then reflect it into the second-hand experience. We cannot take everything, and that we won't have the same clothing in 100 different sizes, but to have a look at what potentially that is that makes this experience of buying new clothes more convenient for these consumers, and try to reflect that where we can into our second-hand design. For those who would not consider buying secondhand in the future, it's of course a little bit of a harder, it's more pre-assumptions which are associated with this idea of secondhand clothing or used clothing in general being less valuable than new, it being unsanitary or it being unhygienic. Now, in the long term, it requires social norms to alter in regards to this idea of used being negative, and maybe to be seen more in a positive light, that it's a piece of clothing which has a history, which has had a previous purpose, and we can of course try to influence that where we can when it comes to marketing, using terms, for example, like pre-loved, having tags with a number of different owners. This idea that actually having history, having multiple owners is a positive thing, not a negative thing. However, in the short term, it definitely means that we need to try to look at how we're presenting secondhand clothing, making sure they are displayed in a way which makes them, we display them in the same manner as we would new clothes, making sure that they are fresh, they are clean. If we have secondhand brick and mortar stores, we make sure there is good ventilation to get rid of any of that kind of smell which can sometimes be associated with used clothes. But also for brands who are associated with high quality clothing in general, trying to make sure that there are guarantees there as well. When people are buying secondhand textiles, especially from a store, from the store itself, the branded store themselves, if they want to resell their own branded clothing as secondhand, making sure there are guarantees there, like this is what we do with the secondhand clothing. It is washed, it is, you know, in this heat of water, etc., etc., making sure that they are completely clean. And we're trying to get rid of this idea of them being unhygienic. In many cases, it is just a pre-assumption. Actually, new clothes in stores are also tried on by many different people who are trying on that piece of clothing before you buy it. You are also wearing a piece of clothing which has been used before. So these ideas of used clothes being somehow unhygienic are in many cases just pre-assumptions, but trying to get rid of those the best we can through efforts such as laundry detergent, making sure they're washed, guarantees, etc. Now, the majority of those who do not currently buy secondhand clothing would not consider doing so. This was true in all apart from Estonia, actually. So in Finland, Sweden and Latvia, for those who are not buying secondhand at the moment, they would not consider doing so in the future, the majority. In Estonia, actually more said they would consider buying secondhand, which is great. Estonia is doing really well there. We should have a look and see what's happening in Estonia. But that's a very positive note for anyone who's interested in the Estonian market, is that there definitely is a lot of consumers are ready to transition, and let's take advantage of that opportunity. Of course, this brings, for Finland, Sweden and Latvia, this identifies or highlights a main issue, which we all know, is trying to get consumers to alter their consumption habits is a big hurdle. Getting that first time engagement with a new service or new product is very, very difficult. Now, interestingly, selling secondhand clothing could potentially be used as a nudge. It could be used as something which may lessen this hurdle. There was in Finland and Sweden, there was a positive correlation between those who are selling secondhand items and also buying secondhand items. This trend was not so evident in Estonia and Latvia, but it's definitely something worth considering. So if we do think of selling as being a potential nudge towards, and this also includes bring back schemes of items back to the store. If we're considering that as being a potential nudge, we do have to have a look at some of the barriers which exist in selling at the moment. So we need to make sure that these selling secondhand platforms or services or bring back schemes, they are as easy, as practical, as effortless and as rewarding as possible. So making this very, very easy for the consumer. Selling clothing in Finland and Sweden was a little bit higher compared to Estonia and Latvia. However, more positive experiences of actually selling were recorded in Sweden and Latvia. So in Finland and Estonia, this selling of secondhand clothing was seen as very, very laborious, very time-consuming, inconvenient. It was not very positively received. However, in Sweden and Latvia, although time-consuming was also mentioned, they also found it handy. They found it convenient. They had a more positive experience or feedback in general. So maybe let's have a look at Sweden and Latvia, what kind of infrastructure there are, what kind of platforms and services there are, and let's try to implement those and of course develop them further wherever we can. Also, interestingly, the peer-to-peer platforms are most popular for selling clothing. So in that sense, if you are a brand or a retailer and you're not currently reselling your own second-hand textiles, your consumers are doing that for you anyway through these peer-to-peer platforms. So that's definitely a great market opportunity there to try to get your clothes back to your store and actually selling them, because there is clearly a very big demand for it. Now, on the other hand, we do need to have a look at these peer-to-peer platforms a little bit more carefully to see what is it that's so enticing for them. Is it actually easier for people to be selling peer-to-peer, or is it that there just aren't that many available alternatives for them to sell their clothing? But in either case, looking at the best practices or the benefits of peer-to-peer, and again, trying to reflect those in our own bring back schemes or selling platforms wherever possible. We can't reflect everything, but having a look and seeing what we can reflect. Now, here's a very quick, just some future considerations based on some of this, based on some of these insights. These are very, very quick. But so as I mentioned, this bring back schemes or selling schemes could be seen as potential nudges to try to get those who are bringing back clothing and also selling clothing to actually becoming the consumers of that second hand. So this does also need some thinking when we think about rewards. If you are giving rewards to consumers for bringing back items to the retailer, maybe trying to nudge them towards a second hand by these gift cards, for example, saying that if they buy new, there's a certain amount of discount, but if they also buy second hand again, then that would be an even higher discount. So through these kind of mechanisms, trying to get these who are donating or bringing back the clothes back into this kind of second hand loop as well. Of course, also making sure that on these platforms, we try to make them as trustworthy as possible. If people selling feel comfortable selling their items and they have a positive experience, they might also feel very comfortable actually buying items from the same platform. So again, thinking of this, trying to get the consumers back into this circle of selling, but also buying. Interestingly, in Finland and Sweden, this idea of secondhand clothing being as a gift was actually viewed as acceptable. So secondhand clothing in Finland and Sweden is seen as an acceptable gift. Again, trying to have a look at what opportunities there might be there. Potential gift cards, especially for platforms which offer maybe very luxury, high quality, branded second-hand textiles, having gift cards for those forms of platforms or those forms of second-hand services. In Estonia and Latvia, this was not so evident. This is, at the moment, there isn't this. We didn't at least notice that there is this acceptance for second-hand clothing as being a gift. However, in Estonia and Latvia, there definitely is a higher rate of using professional services to fix broken items. So Finland and Sweden tend to more throw it away. In Estonia and Latvia, actually using professional services was ranked much higher. That would suggest that either there is better infrastructure there, maybe it's more available, it's maybe more of a norm, or also maybe it's actually a good price to actually get someone professional to fix your items. But again, having a look at Estonia and Latvia and the differences in Finland and Sweden regarding to the gift, and in Estonia and Latvia in regards to professional services, trying to take those opportunities where you can. If there is a market for using professional services in Estonia and Latvia, also offering that with the products that you also sell. But that is the end of my consumer presentation. I hope that has been informative. Now, of course, if you are interested in joining the Baltic Second-Hand project, we do hope that you will find the time to vote for your topics of interest regarding the workshops through the Padlet link, which should still be in the chat, I believe. We will also be sending you all a survey just to inquire of your interest in joining our project. You're more than free to email me directly if you wish, vera.joro@laura.fi, or also visit our website balticsecondhand.eu, or you can follow us on LinkedIn.